This is episode 54, and in today's episode, we're going to dive into the topic of how to forgive and let go. Just a reminder that the Happier Marriage podcast is a premier podcast that integrates biblical and scientific strategies to help to equip Christian spouses to take responsibility for their own happiness within their marriages. And today's show is one more opportunity for you to do just that as we dive into practical strategies and biblical wisdom that will help you let go of the past and embrace what I believe could be a brighter, more fulfilled marital relationship. So if that is what you want to do, and especially when there is forgiveness involved, then this is the episode for you. Now, even though there are a number of ways that others might suggest, or you may have heard on how to forgive and let go of the past, I'll be sharing with you 3 of the most important ones. So I want you to stay tuned for that.
Hello and welcome to the Happier Marriage Podcast, a podcast for spouses longing to have a happier marriage so they can feel more connected, desired and supported. Now, to start the show, here is your host and Sherpa, licensed marriage and family therapist and certified relationship coach, Kingsley Grant.
Now, before we dive deeper into the topic of how to forgive and let go, I want to ask you these three questions. The first question is this: have you ever been deeply hurt by your partner? Second question: have you said or done things that have hurt your partner? And the third question is, have you forgiven them? Have they forgiven you? Or have you forgiven yourself? That's the third question. Now, if you have ever been deeply hurt in your relationship or have been guilty of hurting your spouse, as I mentioned, this episode is really for you. It has your name written all over it. As you know, forgiveness is never easy, right? People who say it is easy, I would say to those people, they have never really been deeply hurt or offended by someone else, right? But here's what I do know. Even though it's not easy, it is possible and it is necessary. Now you might be thinking, why should I forgive? Isn't it better to hold on to past hurts? And some people want to hold on for more reasons than one. So you might be thinking, why should I forgive? Now, I understand your concerns. Forgiveness, as I mentioned, can be challenging. It can be it's a process, it's a journey, but it's essential, I believe, for the health of your marriage, but also for your health as well. Now, here are what I believe are 3 possible things that people may object, or I call objections, that someone may have when it comes to forgiveness, and why forgiveness is still, in my mind, worth pursuing. So the first thing a person may say is, but I'm not the one who did something wrong. And granted, I hear you on that. And I want to say to you, though, forgiveness isn't about condoning, right, the actions or of someone else, or minimizing the impact that it has had on you or someone else, right? It's not about minimizing those things. So if your concern is that I'm not the one who did something wrong, then understand this, that it's about freeing yourself from the burden, the bitterness, the resentment, and allowing healing to take place. So you might be wanting to give place to forgiveness for that one reason. A second objection may be, what if my partner doesn't deserve forgiveness? I chuckle because I'm not somehow minimizing or laughing at the severity of what you might be describing. You may be in a place where you're thinking, he or she doesn't deserve forgiveness for what they have done to me. Well, here's the thing. I always want to bring people back to the idea of, God forgiving us. And the question I ask is, how deserving are you to receive forgiveness from God. I mean, I know I'm not. I know it's we can't make the case for that, right? So forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's about choosing to let go. It's about a choice that you will make to let go of for your own well-being. Because holding onto grudges and unforgiveness, what that does, it perpetuates, right? It perpetuates more of of negativity and resentment, and it keeps you from growing in your own personal relationship, and of course in your marital relationship. And the third objection might be, I've tried forgiving in the past, but Kingsley, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And again, I chuckle. Not again. Don't take this wrong, but because I've heard that many times. I've heard that from people saying it doesn't work, and I'm thinking, well, I don't know how it doesn't work, because if you've been forgiven by God, it does work, right? So forgiveness does work. That is not the question. So we have to understand it's a process that we're called to forgive, but our emotions get stuck. And I get it, and we talk more about that in this episode. So it's normal to struggle with it, right? It's normal to struggle with it. But here's what happened. By exploring the different strategies like those I'll be sharing with you in this episode, and perspectives and reframes, you can find a path that works for you. And hopefully what I share with you in this episode will be a path forward. And when I share a story with you about Sarah and John, you can also see how they had to deal with a very hard issue in their relationship. Now, while forgiving yourself and your partner may seem difficult and challenging or unfair, especially of the severity of what the offense that has been occurring, it's essential, like I say, for your own happiness. It's essential for your own well-being. It's essential for your marriage. So letting go of the past, it allows you to create space for healing, for growth, and I believe, like I said earlier, a brighter, more fulfilling, and successful future together. Now, let's discuss then what I mentioned before. We talked about the objections. What are some benefits? Why would you want to forgive? I've kind of made the case a little bit, or started to make the case, but I want to share with you why you also may want to forgive, and share with you 3 benefits that would possibly encourage and inspire you and motivate you to forgive if you've not yet done so or are struggling with forgiveness. When you forgive, right, it's an emotional freedom. You receive emotional freedom. It frees you up emotionally, right? It releases the heavy emotional baggage that is weighing you down, right? It's like lifting a burden from your shoulders, right? Imagine you have this burden, this heavy stone on your shoulders, and experiencing a because of forgiveness, renewed sense of lightness and freedom. There is a meme, I think, or a graphic, an image that you may have seen where it had this guy trying to push this big boulder up the mountainside, and he's struggling because it's so heavy. Imagine that's what unforgiveness does. It's this heavy boulder you're trying to push uphill to get it from rolling down and crushing you. But you could just step out of the way and release the boulder and allow it to roll down the mountainside. And what it does, it causes you to feel lighter and freer. And that's what forgiveness does. It gives you emotional freedom. The second benefit, I think, it also strengthens the bond in your relationship. It's amazing what that does. I mean, even going back to our God and our relationship, when God reconciled us and gave us a bond, a relationship through forgiveness, right? So when you forgive, it creates room for empathy and compassion. So when you're practicing empathy and compassion, that creates more intimacy. That creates more of a bond. It brings you closer in your relationship. So by understanding that we're dealing with imperfect creatures, right? An imperfect husband, an imperfect wife, and they're just a part of the humanity, right? And the Bible says fallen humanity, which we're flawed, we have imperfections, we will make mistakes. Recognizing that, giving space for empathy and compassion, it can create a deeper bond and build love and acceptance in your relationship. Some skill sets that are very important, or attributes that are very important for your marriage. And the third benefit is the personal growth. I mean, you can't emphasize or state enough about the personal growth that comes when you learn how to forgive, because it enables you, right, to learn how to develop, to develop resilience and empathy and compassion and emotional intelligence and positivity. You name those things. That's what can come through forgiveness. So it impacts all areas of your life. So these three personal benefits, about emotional freedom, strengthening the bond in your relationship, and personal growth. My question would be would that be something that would be helpful? Are those beneficial things? And I would resoundingly say yes. I would shout from the mountaintop, yes, 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 right? So embracing forgiveness in your marriage, then it leads to those things that I just mentioned, and it's transformative, right? It's a transformative process that benefits not only your relationship, but your own well-being. So as I mentioned before, it's not just about for the marriage, which is important, and for your spouse, which is important, but also for your overall well-being. And that is what I want to share with you as well. Now, before I share with you the three practical ways that you can implement forgiveness in your relationship, in your marriage, as I mentioned before, I want to share with you a story of our couple, Sarah and John, which are a fictional couple, right? That will give us some more context on which to build the case for forgiveness, right? I want to share the story with you. Now, Sarah and John, if you've been listening to the past episodes, which I hope you have, they've been married for 13 years and they have 2 young children, right? They have shared a bond that's been built on 3 primary things, love, trust, and mutual respect. That is true of their marriage. Now, however, like any couple, they face occasional disagreements and arguments in which marriage have not faced those things. So, unfortunately, though, in their marriage, as it happens in many marriages, one fateful evening, they found themselves entangled in a heated fight, not physical, but, just a heated exchange that would really leave lasting wounds because the argument began innocently, right? And they both had different opinions about a trivial matter, right? A very trivial matter, but they had different opinions, and they began to argue about the opinions that they both had that were different. Now, as their emotions flared and tensions escalated, and that's how marriages debates tend to be if you don't guard what it is you're doing. So their tension escalated. Their words became sharper and more hurtful. Now, in the heat of the moment, John, he was enraged. He was consumed by anger. So he said things that cut deep into Sarah's heart. And he resorted to name calling, using hurtful and demeaning words that stuck at the core of her self-worth. And the pain that Sarah felt was truly overwhelming. And she couldn't understand how the person she'd been married to for 13 years that she loved and trusted could unleash in her mind such cruelty in the moment of his anger. And the verbal assault left her feeling, as you can imagine, broken and betrayed, and begin to question the very foundation of their marriage. And John, on the other hand, he recognized what he did and was immediately remorseful for his actions. He realized the gravity of his words and the damage he had caused, right? The guilt and regret washed over him as he watched and witnessed the devastation he had unleashed upon the wife that he loved and said he loved. And she believed that he did love her, but is now questioning that. And so what John knew he had crossed a line that should never have been crossed. The name calling, the condescending remarks and the denigration of how he just kind of denigrated her. He crossed the line, and he recognized at the moment when he saw his wife, it's almost like he crushed her and saw that on her face. And so they were now faced with what we would say is a crucial crossroad in their marriage, as you can just imagine. And they could, here's what they could do. They could either allow their relationship to be defined by this moment of darkness, of pain, of the gravity of it. They could allow their marriage to be defined by that, or they could choose to embark or on a journey of a path of healing, forgiveness, letting go, and growth. As I mentioned the benefits earlier, they could choose that path for those benefits, or they can choose to let their marriage be defined by this one, moment. Now, I'm not saying this one moment is minimized or is there, making that less. It's a hard, hurtful, painful, defining moment, we could say, but they could decide. They had a choice to now make. And what I want to share with you is, as we reflect upon Sarah and John's story, I want to consider these three questions here as we kind of move into this idea of unpacking their story and as it relates to you. And then I share with you those three practical strategies of how to approach forgiveness. Now, here's a question. The first question I want to ask is, how would you feel if you were in Sarah's shoes, experiencing the pain of her hurtful words and name calling from your partner? How would you feel if you were in her shoes? Second question, can you relate to the challenges Sarah and John are facing in forgiving and moving past this hurtful moment or this hurtful incident? And the third question is, what steps would you take to rebuild trust and find forgiveness, right, if you were in their situation? What steps would you take? And I hope that what I'm going to share with you in a few moments will be able to answer those questions for you. Because Sarah and John's story, what it does, it truly illustrates what I believe is the importance of mindful communication, of practicing, restraint, practicing emotional intelligence, right? So we see the importance of mindful communication and the lasting impact our words can have on our loved ones. We recognize that, right? Don't you? And it reminds us to choose our words. The Bible speaks about that very carefully, very much. It says, by your words you shall be judged. Words are important, right? It says in the Proverbs with Solomon says, life and death is in the power of the tongue. So we know that we can speak words that are so cutting. Sometimes people would wish we would hit and do something physical rather than those words. I grew up hearing sometimes sticks and stones, and maybe you've heard this, right? Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words never hurt me. Did you hear that growing up? Is that new to you? But I know, I grew up in Jamaica, and one of the things that it's trying to make us tough, right? It thought that by making that statement, it was to toughen us up. And it said, sticks and stones. So as a child growing up, we would say to our friends when they hurt us with our words, that with using words to hurt us, we were kind of being conditioned to say, sticks and stones may hurt my bones, but words, they never hurt me. That's a lie. That was so much a lie. I can tell you how many people I've met, including myself, who experienced such hurtful words that even in our adult years, it continues to hurt. We would have gotten over the sticks and stones. We would have gotten over that and preferred that and moved past that. But those words lingered. So we know of the power of words to linger and how difficult and painful they can be. But to create a happier marriage, both Sarah and John and you and I have to find a way to forgive, let go of the past, and embrace healing and growth. We've got to figure a way how to do that. But how should Sarah and John go about that? And how can you and I also do that? That's the question that we'll have to unpack right after this.
So, the big question is this. How is it possible that you have a happier marriage when you feel like you've tried everything? Your spouse isn't making an effort. You're exhausted. You feel like giving up. Or there's so much hurt that's taken place between you and your spouse. That is the question, and this podcast will give you the answers.
Now, before I share with you the 3 practical ways you can implement forgiveness in your marriage and how Sarah and John also can do the same, I want to ask you to give me about 90 seconds to share some very important information with you. And that is, first thing is that about this podcast. This podcast truly is going to be, it relies upon ratings and reviews for algorithms and for the platform to make sure other people get a chance to hear this podcast. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is to leave me a rating and review. And that's the least you can do by the value that I believe I bring to the show week after week, is to leave a rating and review today on the podcast. And I will share with you towards the end how you can do that very, very easily. 90 seconds or less, you can leave a rating and review. And I believe there's no excuse for that. And that's your donation. I believe that's your donation to the show. And I hope that you will donate for the value you're receiving. Hey, I'm not asking for money. That's all I'm asking you for, so you can help me with doing that. And I really would appreciate that. And I'll tell you again how to do that very quickly. Secondly, if you missed any past episodes, you can always go to happiermarriagesecrets.com and you can access a podcast of all the episodes that are in the past. You can listen to that or other platform in which you're listening to this podcast. Thirdly, if you like to take the temperature of your marriage, especially after some painful, hurtful things, and even if it's not gone through a very painful, hurtful moment, I would suggest that you check in with your marriage. And one of those ways to do that is to take what I call an assessment, a happier marriage assessment quiz that you can take less than 90 seconds. You can take that, get a result, and get a downloadable PDF that explains the results to you. If that interests you, you can go to happiermarriagesecrets.com/quiz, happiermarriagesecrets.com/quiz, and take that quiz. And the links will be in the show description, so you can always find the links right there. So, if you don't write it down or forget, you can go to the show notes or the show description and get those links. And lastly, I want to mention that this show is brought to you by kingslegrant.com, where you can find resources and other services that might be of interest to you. So please pay a visit to kingslegrant.com. And again, thank you. So what are 3 practical or actionable ways you can implement, even starting today, about forgiveness for your marriage? And drawing from Sarah and John's, what inspiration can we draw from their story about healing and reconciliation? And what can we do if we find ourselves in situations like Sarah and John? And that's what I want to share with you now, about 3 ways to go about doing that. The first one is a practice self-reflection and focus on personal growth, right? Practice self-reflection and personal growth. The first thing is that you've got to take responsibility for your actions. You've got to take responsibility for your actions, right? Seek God's forgiveness. Ask God to forgive you, because you've offended not just your partner, but you've offended God, who is in your partner. You've offended God because you have, hurt his creation. And so you ask God to forgive you for your behavior. And don't excuse it. Don't say, I've lost my temper. I just was so mad. Don't excuse your behavior. Take responsibility for that and begin to see this as an opportunity to engage in personal development. As I mentioned before, learning how to be emotionally intelligent, learn how to be mature, learn how to control your emotions, learn how to use better words, learn how to take time out. Those are the self-reflection and personal growth that can happen when you're thinking about forgiveness. Remember, it's an opportunity for you to also grow, right? It's something that can, as terrible, as horrible as it was for Sarah and John, it could be a growth opportunity, right? Sarah and John could truly see this by the choice they make to grow through this. I've heard God has called us to, sometimes God has called us to grow through and go through what we're being experiencing, right? To grow through it. And so it could be an opportunity for God to use this in Sarah's life to forgive John and truly appreciate the forgiveness that he has extended to her, because, she truly offended God, like we all have offended God with the things we've said and done. And we ask God to forgive us. So forgiveness is something that the Bible speaks about that we need to do. And I'll mention more about that in a few moments. But it really gives us an opportunity for personal reflection, self-reflection, and also personal growth. The second thing is in approaching forgiveness, right? So the first thing I want you to remember is an actionable way by thinking about this idea of self-reflection and personal growth. Secondly, it gives you an opportunity to communicate openly and honestly. So you're going to recognize this is an opportunity for you to, like in this case, John, to openly and honestly not only take responsibility, but to communicate with Sarah, what he did. But also Sarah can see it as an opportunity to truly share with John something he would never, ever, ever know or be able to know in how bad or how deeply she was offended or hurt, because that's privy to her, right? If she did it to John, she would never know the pain as John felt it. But in this case, according to the story, as Sarah felt it, he would never know. So she has to then be responsible to share with him her feelings, express, her the pain, and then John have to express his remorse, right? He has to communicate that. It cannot be assumed that, she should know or he should. No, he needs to take responsibility and communicate openly and honestly and listen to her about her perspective, her feelings, without judging it, without, criticizing, without saying, but you've hurt me too. I've seen it so many times in couples. Oh, but you've hurt me too. This is not about comparing notes. This is not a time to compare notes. This is the time to work through what's on the table. And that is this situation that has happened, right? And so John have to talk about his remorse. It just can't assume that Sarah will know how remorseful he is. He needs to take responsibility and communicate openly. Sarah also needs to share about her feelings, express that, and don't leave that to John to, he should know how I feel. No, he should not know. It's your feelings. It's sacred to you. And don't trust your feelings to anybody but you and God. Let God give you the grace and the wisdom, but you need to communicate that to John. Thirdly is seek guidance from the Bible. Let God's word guide you on this. I've mentioned a few things about what the Bible says, right? And about how God, what he teaches about forgiveness. Because Jesus told a story about how this man who owed a king a ton of money, right? A ton of money. And he went to the king and asked for forgiveness because the king was going to throw him and his family in jail, right? And then that man who the king forgave of this ton of money that he owed the king, and he forgave him of all of it. The man went down the street the very same day, according to the story that Jesus shared, went down the street, saw another person who owed him a few cents, let's put it that way, right? A small amount of money. And he decided that that man ought to pay him up what he owed him. And he said, if you don't pay me, I'm going to take you to the courts. And the word got back to the king how this man, what he did. And the king said, are you kidding? Are you serious? Did he just do that? Bring him here. And he says, I forgave you so much. And you went down the street and found this person who owed you so little. And after you received the forgiveness I gave you, you could not forgive that man. You know what? I'm going to rescind my forgiveness. I'm going to rescind what you owe me. You're going to have to pay me every single thing. He was so angry, and rightly so. He's so angry that he says, you're going to be thrown into prison. until you are able to pay up all the money. Now, I don't know how he's going to pay the money because he's in prison, but the story was not about that. The story was about the difference about how much he's been forgiven, yet he would not forgive the little bit the other person owes. And the point of the story was what Jesus was saying is, having been forgiven, you also need to forgive those who have offended you. In light of what God has forgiven Sarah, John's offense is the little amount of money that he owed her. And if she can't forgive that, then how she expects her Heavenly Father to forgive her? That's the gist of the story, that what Jesus was teaching, and the Bible teaches about forgiveness. And you and I have to let biblical principles guide us when it comes to forgiveness. Forgiveness is not an option for you as a Christian. It's not an option. It is something that's been commanded for us to do. God didn't suggest that. He says, forgive those who have hurt you, right? Now, here's what I do know. Forgiveness is a decision that you make, right? And the Bible teaches that. But your emotions may not be yet ready. And it's okay to allow your emotions to take the time it needs to be healed and to get in line with a decision. But here's what happened. Not because you remember something means you haven't forgiven it. No. You remember it because you're human and you have a memory. Thank God for the memory, right? So you don't want to forget that. It's not about forgetting. But forgiveness means making a decision, and every single day you remind yourself that you made a decision to forgive. That is what's going to help your emotion to eventually get to the place where it's on par with the decision you have made, and that will take some time. Be patient with yourself, but do not feel as if because you remember it, you haven't forgiven, and don't allow yourself to act in a way towards John, Sarah, that would say to you that you are holding this against him. Right? You have to remind yourself when you interact with John, and at times, John, when Sarah may have moments where she have relapse, be patient with her. Do not somehow, say, see, you didn't forgive me. Don't. Who are you to throw it in her face? That's not your place. It's to understand she'll have those ouch moments, and she may say, I may have a bad day as I remember how the painful words that you use. That may come, John. But you both have to work on this together and follow the prescription that God has given and laid out for you. So 3 things you need to do is practice self-reflection and personal growth, right? That's the actionable ways or practical ways. Practice self-reflection and personal growth. Communicate openly and honestly on both sides, and seek guidance from the Bible. Let God direct you, the Holy Spirit direct you on how to approach this. Now, these are very important for forgiveness, and these steps will help you navigate, I believe, the forgiveness process and cultivate a happier and more fulfilling relationship. So in this episode, as we kind of summarize here, we explore the power of forgiveness in your marriage. I debunked the objections to forgiveness and highlighted the 3 benefits of embracing it, right? And I shared the story of Sarah and John and provided the 3 practical steps for implementation, which are, again, practice self-reflection and personal growth, communicate openly and honestly, and seek guidance from God's Word through prayer and reading the scriptures I mentioned before. Now, remember, letting go of the past and forgiving yourself is also important. John, you've got to forgive yourself. You can't beat yourself up about something that has happened. You have to forgive yourself. And as you forgive, as Sarah, you have to forgive John, right? But John, you need to forgive yourself as well. And there's a whole different episode I could do on that. But it's important that you do that, right? Because by doing so, it can transform your marriage and create a more joyful, fulfilling, happier, tighter, intimate relationship. Now, I'd love to hear your thoughts on anything I've shared today in this episode. From the start of the show to this point, you can always direct message me on Instagram or Facebook or through an email that an answer will share with you briefly about how to connect with me. Now, leaving a rating and review, like I mentioned before, it's as simple as ABC. A, on the platform Apple Podcast. So I would prefer Apple because that's where most of the ratings are actually that matters. So Apple Podcast or the platform you're listening to, just do a search, Happier Marriage, find the Happier Marriage. B, click on the image that pops up. Click on the image that pops up. Excuse me, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So click on the image and scroll down, and you'll find it says ratings and reviews. Click on that. 5-star. Okay. But if I don't know how many stars you want to, but I prefer a good rating and review. And just leave a sentence or two about your thoughts about even this episode today. And I want to say thanks again for listening. And the announcer will tell you how to get a free gift just for listening and staying tuned to this end, and how to connect with me to the announcement I will make. Now let's make marriages happier again, and God bless.
We've come to the end of another exciting show, and if you enjoyed this podcast, 1, make sure you give this show a rating and review. 2, subscribe to the show to get all new releases. And 3, get your complimentary copy of the 5 Secrets to a Happier Marriage ebook at kingsleygrant.com/HMS ebook. Again, it's kingsleygrant.com/HMS ebook. See the link in the show notes. Do it today. Don't delay. Thanks so much for listening, and make sure you tell one other spouse about this show, or better yet, share it with them. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. May he turn his face toward you and give you his peace, both now and forever.